The snowplow incident. Jack wasn't just a snowplow operator, he was the lifeline for his remote Alaskan town. The roads he cleared during brutal winters were the only connection to the outside world. His dedication came at a cost. Long, lonely hours battling howling winds and blinding snow. But Jack wasn't the kind of man to complain. On the night he vanished, the storm was unusually violent. The narrator describes how Jack prepared, his ritual of checking the plow's engine, the crackle of the radio, and his wife packing him a thermos of soup. Before leaving, he hesitated at the door, staring into the swirling snow. "Something feels off tonight," he murmured, but he brushed it off and left. Hours into his route, Jack radioed dispatch. His voice was calm at first, but tinged with unease. "I'm seeing something strange," he said. He described lights darting between the trees, moving in ways that defied logic. As the hours passed, his transmissions became more frantic. "They're following me," he whispered at one point. "I can't outrun them." When Jack stopped responding, a search team was dispatched. They found his snowplow idling on the highway, its lights illuminating a wall of snow. The door was open, and Jack's boots sat on the floor, as if he had stepped out into the storm barefoot. What the rescuers found next was even stranger. Around the plow were shallow, claw-like imprints in the snow, arranged in a spiral. No footprints led away. The search continued for weeks, but Jack was never found. Local legends spoke of a creature known as the Blizzard Wraith, an ancient being said to prey on those who traveled alone during storms. Jack's wife later recounted haunting dreams in which he appeared at their window, frostbitten and whispering, "Don't look at the lights, they'll take you too." The ice fisherman's shadow. Carl had fished on frozen lakes for decades, his rugged stubbornness carrying him through countless winters. But the lake he chose that January was different, a remote spot known only to locals, shrouded in stories of strange disappearances. Carl didn't believe in such things. On the morning of his last fishing trip, Mary, his wife, noticed his odd behavior. He stared out the window, mumbling, "The ice is calling me." Despite her protests, he packed his gear and drove off. By the time a search party reached the lake days later, Carl's truck was hidden under a thick layer of snow. His fishing equipment was perfectly arranged near a hole in the ice, but something was off. A second, smaller hole was nearby, surrounded by drag marks, as if something had been pulled into the water. There were no footprints, not even Carl's. Witnesses came forward with chilling accounts. One hiker swore he saw Carl standing motionless on the ice, staring at the ground as if listening. Another claimed to see a dark, towering figure behind him. Divers sent to search the lake emerged shaken, reporting an unnatural cold beneath the surface and hearing whispers. One diver even claimed to see a pale hand pressing against the ice from below. Mary began receiving phone calls at odd hours. Each time there was only static and a faint voice repeating, "It's so cold. It's so dark." The calls stopped after she visited the lake, leaving behind Carl's favorite fishing rod and a small candle. But locals still hear faint knocking under the ice during the coldest nights, as if something or someone is trying to escape. The frozen rescue. The storm began as a whisper in the distance, a murmur of icy wind threading through the towering pines of the Canadian Rockies. By nightfall, it had transformed into a raging beast, swallowing everything in its path. 3 hikers, friends on what was meant to be a weekend adventure, were caught in its jaws. They managed a brief, frantic call for help before the signal died, leaving only the echo of their desperate voices hanging in the frozen air. The rescue team was called in at dawn. Led by veteran searcher Ben and his partner Sarah, they were a group accustomed to braving brutal conditions, but even they hesitated at the storm's ferocity. Visibility was nearly zero, the wind's howl a constant scream in their ears. Still, they pressed on, following what little information the hikers had managed to provide before vanishing. The hike to the location was grueling. Snow piled in knee-deep drifts, the cold biting through even their thickest layers. As they approached the hikers' last known coordinates, an eerie silence fell over the team. The forest around them seemed unnaturally still, the storm's fury muffled as if the trees were holding their breath. They found the campsite by mid-afternoon. It was a scene of chaos. The tents were shredded as though ripped apart by claws, not wind. Supplies lay scattered, half buried in snow. A small campfire, long extinguished, stood in the center, surrounded by a ring of disturbed snow. "No footprints," Ben muttered, crouching near the fire. His voice was barely audible over the wind. Not even theirs. Sarah pointed to a trail leading away from the site. A single set of barefoot tracks meandered into the dense forest. The tracks were fresh, impossibly so given the storm. "Who the hell would walk barefoot in this cold?" she whispered, a chill unrelated to the weather running down her spine. The team followed the tracks, tension mounting with every step. The deeper they went, the stranger the forest became. The trees were unnaturally twisted, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal hands toward the overcast sky. The wind carried faint whispers, voices too soft to understand but too distinct to dismiss as mere imagination. "Do you hear that?" One team member, Greg, asked, his breath visible in the freezing air. Ben nodded but didn't respond. He didn't want to admit that the voices sounded like they were coming from all around them, echoing in a way that defied logic. The tracks led to a clearing. In the center, they found one of the hikers. His name was Adam. He was alive, but barely. His face was a mask of frostbite, his lips cracked and blue. His eyes, wide with terror, darted around as if expecting something to leap from the shadows. "They're still out there," he rasped, his voice barely audible. She told us she'd help, but she lied. She lied." "Who?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside him. "Who lied?" Adam's gaze locked onto hers, his expression desperate. "The woman in white. She called to us, led us here. She said she'd take us somewhere warm, but it's so cold. So cold." Before they could press him further, the wind shifted. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. The shadows of the trees seemed to lengthen, creeping toward the clearing. "We need to move," Ben said, his voice tense. He and Sarah hoisted Adam between them and began the trek back. But the forest had changed. The trail they had followed was gone, replaced by an endless expanse of snow and trees. The whispers turned to singing, a soft, mournful melody that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was a woman's voice, lilting and sweet, but tinged with an undercurrent of sorrow. "Don't listen," Adam hissed, his voice frantic. "She's trying to make you follow her." But it was impossible not to hear. The song wormed its way into their minds, each note pulling at their thoughts, urging them to turn away from their path. Then came the laughter. Low, guttural, and mocking, it echoed through the trees, blending with the wind. Greg stopped suddenly, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "See what?" Ben snapped, his patience thinning. "There, behind the trees," Greg pointed, his breath quickening. "Something's watching us." They all turned, shining their flashlights into the forest. For a moment, they saw nothing but snow and shadows. Then, at the edge of the light, a figure emerged. She was tall and impossibly thin, her skin pale as the snow. Her long white hair flowed like silk in the wind, and her eyes glowed faintly, a cold, piercing blue. She wore a dress of tattered white fabric that billowed around her as if alive. "She's here," Adam whispered, his voice trembling with dread. The woman smiled, her lips parting to reveal sharp, unnaturally white teeth. She raised a hand, beckoning them closer. The wind around them seemed to die, replaced by an overwhelming, bone-deep cold. The team ran. They didn't think. They just moved, Adam's limp form dragging between Ben and Sarah. But the forest worked against them. The trees closed in, their branches clawing at their clothes and packs. The snow beneath their feet seemed to shift, pulling them deeper into the woods. Behind them, the woman's laughter grew louder, mingling with the whispers and the mournful song. The cold intensified, numbing their limbs and clouding their thoughts. Greg was the first to fall. One moment he was running, and the next he was gone, swallowed by the shadows. His scream was cut short, leaving only the echo of his terror in the wind. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, only Ben, Sarah, and Adam remained. They stumbled into the open, collapsing into the snow as the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds. When the rescue team arrived hours later, they found Ben and Sarah huddled together, clutching Adam's lifeless body. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, his lips parted as if trying to scream. To this day, neither Ben nor Sarah speak of what they saw in the forest. Locals claim the woman in white is still out there, her mournful song echoing through the trees during the coldest nights, waiting for her next victims.